It's common among Christians, especially evangelical Christians, to think that the kingdom of heaven refers to the afterlife, where you go when you die, provided that you have been saved. However, Jesus points out repeatedly that the kingdom of heaven is within you, or the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That is, here and now. We have access to the kingdom of heaven at this very moment. As Cynthia Bourgeau says about the kingdom of heaven, you don't die into it, you awaken into it. People also imagine that Jesus is describing a hoped-for kingdom on this earth, one in which peace and justice might reign supreme, a world of equality and harmonious contentment. Working to create such a kingdom is a worthy endeavor, but so far, our attempts to create utopias on earth haven't worked out too well. And while Jesus' followers were eager for him to put on a crown and live into their vision of what a Messiah should be, Jesus assured them that my kingdom is not of this world. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus reveals himself to be a wisdom teacher, not the new Moses or a new David. Let me suggest that Jesus is using the kingdom of heaven metaphorically. The kingdom represents a new state of consciousness, a transformed awareness that enables us to look at the world in a completely different way. In one of the parables we read this morning, Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened." Remember how during the season of the coronavirus, many people started baking bread? So many, in fact, that it became difficult to find yeast. So lacking yeast, many people made sourdough starters to use as the leavening agent in their bread recipes. More than a few refrigerators grew crowded because of the expanding sourdough starter spilled over from one container to another, and the starter's starter, the would-be baker, had more leavening than she could use. Humans have been using yeast for about 10,000 years. Yet yeast, the fungi that allowed fermentation, the molecular process through which cells convert sugar into more complex molecules, existed for millions of years before humans walked the earth. Since its discovery, the fermentation process has been used to produce not only bread, but cheese and beer and spirits and yogurt and kimchi and kombucha. And single-celled organisms like yeast, bacteria, and algae are used to produce life-saving drugs, ethanol, and even fragrances. These organisms are all types of fungi that existed long before the first plants ever took root on Earth's soil. A book that changed my conception of fungi was written a few years ago by a young scientist with the imagination of a poet named Merlin Sheldrake, called Entangled Life: How Fungi Made Our World, Changed Our Minds, and Shapes Our Future. Plants grab our attention because they're so visible. They shade us, shelter us, clothe us, and feed us. Yet without fungi, as Sheldrake points out, many of the plants we take for granted wouldn't exist. If you give fungi any thought at all, you probably think of the mushroom that pops up on your lawn after a summer rain, or the portobello that adorns your dinner plate. But mushrooms are just the visible flowering part of a far-reaching underground fungal universe. The largest recorded fungal network is found in Oregon. It's a network that extends over 4 square miles and is thousands of years old. These fungal networks are called mycelium. Mycelium is like yeast. Both are fungi. But unlike most yeast cells, which grow in a single cell, mycelium is multicellular and can grow into macro-sized structures. Mycelium is made up of tubular cells that branch and tangle and spread over vast distances. And across these distances, they produce very complex structures so small that they can only be seen under a microscope. Plants and fungi form an intricate, mutually dependent, symbiotic relationship. Overlapping networks of plants and fungi are coupled together underground. Nutrients can pass from plant to plant through the fungi. Miraculously, a less shaded plant, a donor plant, is able to pass carbon to a more shaded plant, a receiver plant that needs it more. Very few plants can live without their fungal partners, and it all takes place hidden underground. As is written in the Gospel of Thomas, the Father's kingdom is spread out upon the earth, and the people don't see it. This social network of plants is sometimes called the Wood Wide Web. This picture of the biological world and the network of fungi in particular forces us to rethink some of our assumptions about individuality. We too are made up of microbial organisms. We carry within our bodies more microbial cells than we have of our own, and we're dependent upon them. Even within our own bodies, the idea of being an individual is called into question. We are more deeply interconnected with creation than we might ever imagine. Perhaps we can learn to exist on this planet in new ways by recognizing just how interconnected we really are, by finding the divine in the everyday, by daily attendance at the sacred meeting of the divine and the natural world. Jim Marion, in his book Putting on the Mind of Christ, writes that the kingdom of heaven is Jesus' way of describing a state of non-dual consciousness, or unitive consciousness. A characteristic of this kind of awareness is that it sees no separation between God and humans, nor between humans and other humans. And neither, I would suggest, between humans and the microbial world that inhabits us and surrounds us. The great mystic, Meister Eckhart, once said, "Each person has a vintage wine cellar, and they seldom drink from it." Once you have a taste of that vintage wine, a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven, the taster is eager to sell all he has and buy that treasure-imbued field or that precious pearl. Think of the pearl as the life-giving connection with the divine. A pearl of great value that began its formation as an irritating grain of sand inside the body of an oyster. And the parable of the mustard seed illustrates the interconnection between the seed, the farmer, the plant, and the bird's home. Jesus is describing an intertwining world of sacred theology. Each of these parables points us to the realization that we are all one. And not just humankind, but animals and plants, and yes, mycelium. The question I'd like to leave you with is this: how do we live into the realization that we are indeed one? Here's a hint. I think it's about ego transcendence. Jesus was offering examples of how we can see our interconnectedness and use that understanding to help enable us to transcend our ego and displace our narrow, human-centric view of the world. Jesus is using his parables to lead us to the transcendent. And Jesus asked his disciples, "Have you understood all this?" And the disciples answered, "Yes." Jesus replied to them, and perhaps to us, is about how a scribe has been trained for the kingdom of heaven. It's like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure that which is old and that which is new. We are scribes in training for the kingdom of heaven. Amen.